Welcome to the podcast, Alex. This is going to be a great conversation because you have more than one cure for the Podfade.
Yeah, I like to think there's only one cure for Podfade to not do it. I guess we're treating multiple symptoms, right? So
maybe that's what I should say. Is you have multiple cures for different aspects of
there you
Podfade.
go. I love it.
And what I think is really interesting is that you come up in a lot of conversations that I have with other people. And that's when I got really excited about he's willing to come on my podcast. And I want to talk about the different ways you're supporting podcasters because Pod Pros has so many ways it's supporting people to not pod fade out. And you have such a unique message. So I want to know, what do you think the number one reason people are like, mic drop, I'm out?
Right. Well, first off, I got to say this. I saw Cure for Podfade first on I think it was on a thermos, like a bottle, basically, is where I saw it. And that's how I met. I'm like, hey, I love that. And that's basically how Jen and I met. We had that conversation from there. So ever since I saw that, I've had a lot of respect for what you've done. And you've had some amazing people that really are providing that cure on the show. So again, thank you for what you're doing. This is amazing. And I'm honored to be here and excited to dive into this here. So
thank you.
First, of course, yeah. The first thing I see, and I guess maybe we should start with this because I'm just going to pull a whole bunch of people out of the list. People podfade all the time who just want to try something new. Like they heard of podcasting, they want to try it. And realistically, I'm okay with that. That's okay. If they just want to try something new, but I never had a long-term plan to do it. I just wanted to see what it was like. That's curious. That's fine. There's no problem with that, right? People go and try sports all the time and they decide they don't like it. So they stop. So I'm fine with that. And then there's two other categories of people that I'm like, okay, it's okay if you leave. And you know what I'm going to say? It's the people that want to get rich really fast or they want to get famous really fast. And when those two people are like, you know what? It's been 2 weeks and people aren't knocking my door to sign their podcasting mics. And it's been 2 weeks. I'm not a multi-billionaire and I haven't quit my job. What is going on here? And they leave. There's not much we can do to help those people. So again, the person just trying it out and the person wants to get rich and the person wants to get famous. 3 people we just can't help. And realistically, that probably makes up 50% of people who podfade, which means there's still the other half. And I think that's the ones we care about. The first problem I see is people getting into podcasting thinking it's not going to take work and then realizing, oh my gosh, there's a lot that goes into releasing a podcast episode, a lot. And people just don't realize that. So at first they're passionate and they're excited. So they're fueled by that. But as soon as that wears off at all, they're like, oh man, I got to spend 6 hours getting my next episode done now. And people are like, oh, it's just so much. So there's the stress, there's the anxiety that comes with it, the pressure. And I find that's really the main thing. And what it comes down to, Jen, is an organizational issue, I think. If I can get down to the very core of it, it's that people have not taken the time to document what it is they need to do every time they're releasing an episode and figure out ways to start streamlining that process. Instead, most new podcasters I talk to say, yeah, I just remember all in my head. I'm like, but do you? There's a lot to remember. And the famous productivity expert, David Allen, says our head is for having ideas, not for storing them. And he also says your head is a crappy office. And I agree with those things. As soon as I learned to put it all on paper and have my entire flow organized, podcasting became very simple. Let's put it that way. And it wasn't what I was struggling with at first. So it's a long answer there, Jen. And I'm sorry for taking so much time there, but I believe that really is the primary issue I'm seeing right now.
And no sorries first. That's one rule here. We don't apologize.
Okay, no sorries.
For good answers. If you're being a jerk or something, you can apologize.
Okay, but, I'll try not to do
other
that.
Than that, just call people out. But I think that's one of your cures is that you've created something for podcasters in your Pod Pros brand that helps. And this is why when I came on, I'm so excited to talk to you because every time you see a hole, you seem to create something that keeps that 50% moving forward. So tell me a little bit about how you streamlined this and came across okay, this is how the single solo podcaster can streamline this stuff. Get it out of your head.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So when I first figured out this was an issue, I was like, this is easy. There's project management software everywhere. So what I did is I started telling people, hey, you need a system. Go try Trello, go try Asana, go try Monday.com, whichever one works for you. And I didn't realize, Jen, I created another problem for podcasters. If you were experienced with those softwares for project management or just keeping up with your daily tasks, then that's great. Then you were good to go. But most people in podcasting aren't familiar with those things. So they're like, Alex, I'm like, why'd you quit? I gave you a tool. I gave you one of these tools. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with them. But the problem is they do 20,000 different things. So when I tell someone who's already stressed out, feeling like they're not going to be able to release their next episode on time, to go use this tool that'll take you 6 months to a year to learn because it does 20,000 different things, I didn't help you at all. And so I realized, I'm like, oh, shoot. Well, is there an easier one, right? Is there something we can do? And out of that became what we call podcast SOP. And SOP stands for Standard Operating Procedures. So we built this software that literally only helps do one thing. It helps podcasters release episodes on time. My co-founder, who's my developer, would hate to hear me say this, but more or less, it's a glorified checklist that you create of all the things you do every time you're releasing an episode. And whenever you're doing a new episode, you hit add episode, and it'll automatically populate your list of however many things you do. It'll give you the instructions. You can comment back and forth. You can upload things. It'll give you dates, all the things, right? Links, everything you need is all right there. That way, again, you can just say, okay, new episode. Oh, thank goodness. Here's the 20 things I need to do so I don't need to remember them. Step 1, here we go. Step 2, step 3. And people design this themselves or they use our templates. But the idea was, okay, we're not just going to push people to a project management software that, again, does too much and it's overwhelming enough when they're already feeling overwhelmed. Here's a really simple thing. And I like to think you can learn probably realistically 8 to 10 minutes. You can learn the whole thing and figure it all out because it doesn't do very much. And again, I'm not trying to sell it short, but the problem is so much of this does so much, right? And that's why it was just causing more problems for people. So yeah, we built this solution to make it really simple. And as a matter of fact, the data Jen shows, it's a newer software. It's only like a year and some months old, but your podcasters who use it podcast 12 times longer than the average who don't. And again, some of them just don't use anything. So maybe that's the problem. But in general, we have the data to show, hey, 12 times longer, like this product is a huge win for the industry.
Yeah. And I think that there's like the key here is like, you're not selling it short. One of the concepts that I know I fell into is like this, we need more. We need to be more places. We need to do more things. We need these robust softwares. When we can simplify it down, simplified seems to make a bigger impact.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer of that. I really am in most ways because I've been the person who tried to use all the power-ups, the plugins and all these things. And I found they were breaking more than they were working. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm spending like 2 hours a day fixing these things so I can say I have a fancy automation. I'm like, maybe I should just not have a fancy automation and take the extra 3 minutes every week to just do it manually. And because of that, we use Podcast SOP for our podcasts, for our virtual events, for our daily marketing tasks. We use it literally for anything that's considered an ongoing project in our organization. We run through that now versus any other form of project management software and stuff. So anyway, I love it. Obviously, I created it, so I'm a little bit biased, but I do see it really helping and serving a need in the industry that is, in my mind, the leading cause of people stepping away from it.
Yeah, it's something that I recommend to my clients too, because again, you've simplified it. Anything we can do to simplify down what people are Googling. Like if we could kill the Google monster for a minute and just like focus on one thing, like the one task, like create your workflow. I truly believe that that's why, again, I keep saying like, you have created multiple solutions underneath because you found these holes. And one of the holes is overwhelm because of too much I wouldn't call it access, but too much that you can offer inside a software that it's not built for podcasters. Podcasting is its own beast.
That's a good way to say it. And yes, it is.
Going into this, I know that like you just mentioned events. We just came off of one of your amazing events that I was like so excited. I'm like can't wait for July. I'm like already like blocked off the day I'm coming in. But you said this other word that kind of goes into this. Okay, so now we've streamlined. We're actually producing. We're getting ahead. We're not quite as overwhelmed, but we still want to grow. And you had a drinking game during. Let's preface, you could drink tea, coffee, whatever it was, because for me, it was bright and early in the morning. But every time you mentioned the word community, and I think this is another hole that you saw in the market that is a part of the cure for Podfade is building the community.
Yeah, it really is. For me, if I think about my life, I thrive a lot more when I'm in community, just as an individual. And let's take that like multiple steps further. If I want to get better at soccer, I join a community of soccer players. I'll go play pickup soccer with people, right? And that's a sport that I love to play. But also, if you watch any of like National Geographic or any like for me, like when I was growing up, I loved all the animal things. the lions and tigers always went after the animal that was by itself, never after anything when it was in a herd or a group. And for us, I don't know why we think it's any different than that, because I meet independent podcasters all the time that say, I don't have time to be in the community. I'm just going to do this alone. And if there's anything that like history or that even nature and the animal kingdom has taught us, is if you're doing it alone, you're probably going to fail. And that just is the nature of people say, no, I got it. There's enough resource out there. I'm okay. But the truth is, when you're not around people going the same direction as you, you tend to fade or tend to veer off in a different direction. And almost hands down, I can tell somebody when someone's like, oh, I met this guy who podcasts. What do you think of him? I'm like, oh, well, he's not in any podcasting communities. And like, yeah, but he's doing a really good job. I'm like, he's not going to make it. I don't mean to be rude, but like, I'm 99% right when I say that. So I feel very confident taking that gamble on that 1%. Let's put it that way. I don't say it to be rude or mean. And I've told some people that to their faces. I'm like, hey, listen, you need to lose your attitude and be nice to other podcasters and be in community with them, or you're just not going to make it. Like, whatever, dude, I'll prove you wrong. 2 weeks later, they're gone, because you can't. That's just not how it works. Even the best podcasters in the world, the top of the top, are in small masterminds with other podcasters. I myself have a big podcasting community that is, I think it's like over 5,000 people that we're together in that. But I'm also in one that there are 14 of us, and they're the people that are holding me accountable, right? Like, accountability comes with community. And that's another really important element of it. So to me, everything rises and falls in the community that you have around you. And that to me is like, if I see that you don't have one, that's a major red flag for me to even want to listen to your podcast, because I assume you're going to stop within the next couple of weeks.
And it's so true. And we made fun because you said it so many times, but I think that really drives it home, is like, okay, we have good content. Now we've streamlined. We need to build this as a community. Like, whether that is, your podcast should be a community itself. I believe every podcast should be a community. But having that other end of being in someone's community, to be around like-minded people, because if you're a podcaster and you're in a community for just social media people, you're going to get lost and overwhelmed and wonder why the strategies aren't working, because it's, again, a different beast.
Yeah, I'll go through. And by the way, I love the point you just made about a podcast being a community with your list. That's where the real power of podcasting comes from. And you know who's really great at this? You just had her on the podcast, Ina. It was, if I'm remembering correctly, it was episode 72 and posted on 4/18/2023. And it was about turning a small audience into big profits. And I encourage anyone listening to this who hasn't heard that one, go back to episode 72 with Ina Coovey, or how do you say, Coveney? I don't know.
I think it's Coveney.
Coveney. That's good. Anyway, sorry, Ina, I love you. Go back and listen to that, because she talks about how to turn a podcast into big profits. And people are like, how can you do that? It's because she has a community. She knows the people that are in her like podcast sphere, right? The people that are listening. She's not like, oh, I've never talked to my listeners. No, she has built a true community around them, because that they trust her and they're willing to pay her because she's going to offer the solution to their problem. They know that because they know Ina. And so, yeah, I not just on the making money side, in general, the power of podcasting comes when you break down the wall between you and your listeners and leave that open. The more open that is, the more free flowing it can be, and they have access to you, the more it makes people want to be part of that tribe. And you'll find that your listenership will grow a lot faster if you're available versus not available.
Yeah. And I think another side of that is also the community within the people that you bring into your show itself, and the guest aspect. Personally, podcasting saved my life. I truly, like, I have a podcasting saved my life story. And I think that's one of the things, and it was your service. Again, I'm not just trying to shamelessly plug for you, but your service was the first one I found. And I was like, I can meet podcasters. This is like a dating app for podcasters. And I'm finding people that are aligned because, and I'm not talking about I'm going out on dates, people. Like, I'm saying, like, we're meeting hosts and guests, and they've become some of my best friends.
Yeah. First off, I mean, thank you for allowing me to play a small part in your journey. Like, that means so much to me. Like, I could end right here, which we won't for the listeners, but I could end right here and feel really good about myself. So thank you. I appreciate that. But no, honored to help. Like, you are offering a great service to the industry. You're doing great work. And if I played any small part in that, thank you. Love that. What you're describing is Podmatch. And again, it's not for actual dating, but it's, for lack of a better term, for anyone who has no idea, it's a service that automatically connects podcast guests and hosts together for interviews. It does work just like a dating app, but it connects you for an interview, not for a date. And Jen did bring up the point. I think it's when we were in person. You said, hey, if there's ever actually like someone starts dating or gets married, like, you should have part of that. And I agree. I think I should be efficient. Is that how you say it? Like at the wedding
Yeah.
or at something. I don't know. I should be able to do a reading. I have no idea. But anyway, Jen, for what it's worth, yeah, we're connecting people for interviews, not for dates.
Well, we might be you might be connecting people for dates too. You have no idea, because podcasting is that powerful in connecting human to human.
Yes. Somebody recently said they're someone who uses Podmatch, but they're also in my mastermind, Podmatch Elite Mastermind. And we were together in Las Vegas for a conference, a podcasting conference, because it's all we do, obviously. And there was a whole group of us. And he goes, you know what? I used to think that you all were my closest podcasting friends. He goes, but you all are actually just my closest friends. And that really resonated with me. I was like, man, we really are. We're building something together. We all have different shows, or we have different platforms, and we're guests, like whichever side of the mic we're on, we are doing something together. And I think to the Helen Keller quote, who said, alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. And I find because we're doing so much together, we're building this basis for strong, lifelong friendship. So again, podcasting saved your life. Podcasting has brought so much light and joy to my life as well. I'm right there with you.
And I think that's one aspect of podcasting that most people forget about, because we look at, most people are like, oh, my numbers are low. Okay, so who cares? There's still 20 people showing up to your podcast. Like, hey, that's 20 people showing up for you every week, twice a week. And the communities, the friendships that, like, I had so much fun meeting you in person, because like your program is in a course that I teach. Like I literally have a module. It's like, this is how you set up your pod match. This is how you use this. And you're like, hey, did you hear of SOP? And I'm like, I need to know all the things. And now that's going to be a piece of the puzzle too for my podcasters, because again, you're creating multiple layers because of a hole that you saw because you're passionate about this. But I got to know, like, how did you decide podcasting was your thing? Because it's like your business now. Like you've created apps and software around this. Like, when did you just say, like, this is it?
Well, it happened by mistake. Jen, if you're cool with it, I'll share this story real quick. I'll try to keep it brief. Yeah. So I was in big corporate, and I loved my time in big corporate. I did 15 years. But at one point, the company went from privately owned to public. And there was this gap of year 12 to 15 when I was in this business. And through some things that happened along the way, none of them negative, I just realized I was always a bit of an entrepreneur working in an organization, which I guess has now been coined, Jen, as an intrapreneur. Is that how you say it? I think, right? Something like that.
I'm going to say yes.
Yes, let's say yes. Someone listening, somebody listening can correct us or say, yep, they're right. So I think it's called an intrapreneur, which it just means you're in an organization, but you operate as an entrepreneur. And that was always me. Like I worked my way up to the C-suite level, but I was always the guy like driving things forward. But when we went public, now it's about following the status quo, because you have shareholders and boards and stuff like that. And again, that is the goal. That was the goal of the company. We got there. We did it. But I just realized that my time of feeling fulfilled, my work was nearing an end. And that's when I started looking to get into entrepreneurship. I was like, I think I want to try that. So I started what we all do, side hustles, right? So I started doing all kinds of little things. And the thing is, nothing ever clicked. And I had these moments, Jen, where I was like, you know what? Maybe I'm not an entrepreneur. Like maybe I need to find another job. And that really was painful. I was like, man, maybe I'm just not cut out for this. And so my lightning fast brain decided, you know what? I'm going to start a podcast so I can talk to people who had successfully left a 9-to-5 job to pursue entrepreneurship full time and ask them how they did it. It's free coaching, and I'm going to learn. I'm going to bring people along the way with me. And so that was my podcast idea. Yes, everyone's clapping who's listening to this right now. Like, I agree. It's a good idea. 2 things happened. 1, I figured out how to become an entrepreneur. But 2, I figured out that the space I wanted to be an entrepreneur in was podcasting. So to kind of give you this recap here, and I'm going to simplify entrepreneurship way too much, but I basically look at it in four phases. Phase 1, find an area of passion, which requires you to explore, right? Like explore different things, find an area of passion. Number 2, get into that community. So when you find your passion, dive into the community, get with the people, right? So I started speaking at podcasting conferences because I realized I was actually passionate about podcasting. Number 3, find a simple problem that community is struggling with. And then 4, offer the fastest, simplest solution to that problem you possibly can. And that's how I've started all the things I've started in podcasting. But again, that's what led me out of the 15-year career I had. Now, one caveat I have to share, because I think this is important. My last day there, I was leaving in very good standing. And that's because I believe the way you end one season is the way you begin the next. You start on the same foot that you leave on. So for me, I left on good terms. A year later, they asked me to come back and speak at a senior guys going away thing. They would have me back tomorrow, and I'm thankful for that. But I want to make sure it's known. I wasn't like slacking for 3 years trying to get out. No, I worked my hardest till the day I left. But I think that's what set me in motion. I believe that is what set me in motion when I got into podcasting full time, was just that, you know what? I left a success. I started off as a success. And it was years in the making, of course. And I just really simplified the process, made it really fast. But that's what got me into podcasting. I just started a show and then realized, oh, wait, I'm passionate about this. I love the people that make up podcasting, because I dove into that community, right? And then I just knew, I'm like, okay, I'm doing this entrepreneurship thing and it's going to be in podcasting because I love it. What are they struggling with? Okay, here it is. Let me offer that simplest solution I possibly can. And that right there is the whole story.
But that's a great story. And it proves that simple works. It proves that you're like, I mean, the way that you keep saying it's like, oh, but I've simplified it too much. I don't think you have. I think this is what makes you stand out in the podcast world, in the cure for Podfade, is this simplicity. It truly is simple. Systems, community, passion. Like, it can be that simple. And you have created something that continues to grow. Like, I love when I get in people's spaces. Like I said the other day, I was talking to a podcaster and they were on one of your online events. I think it was like Podfest Global or something. And they're like, I watched all these things and this guy came on and told me this, this, and this. And I'm like, was it Alex? And he's like, yes. And he had a totally different point of view than everyone else. And again, the simplified. I saw the whole. I found something I was passionate about and I wanted to make it easier for others.
Yeah, that was an interesting, I got a lot of buzz from that. I didn't expect it. So Podfest Global is like, I'd say it's the biggest virtual podcasting event. And I was one of the speakers, and the MC right when I finished, she goes, I'm not sure what to say. She goes, because everyone else for the last few days has said the exact opposite of everything you just said. And I was like, oh, oops, I didn't mean to like undermine anybody. But yeah, I think that in general, we overcomplicate. And that's just the creator space. Our minds are always thinking, what's next? What else can we do? But I'm going to share a real secret about podcasting. Is that all right? Like, this is like, get ready to write this down. This is a big deal. The only thing you have to do to be considered a podcaster is release podcast episodes on a consistent basis. That is the only thing you have to do. You don't need a website. You don't need any social media channels. You don't need to run a YouTube channel. You don't need all the other things that everyone assumes you need. You can definitely add them, and some of them, yes, are best practices, and you will want to add them as time goes on. But from day one, all you have to do is consistently release audio on an ongoing basis and make that's your podcast, right? And I think that's where some of us we get trapped in this creative cycle, which is okay. Like, it's great to try new things, but we're like, oh, I need this. Oh, there's TikTok now. Okay, now there's YouTube Shorts. Oh, podcasting is now YouTube, and YouTube is podcasting. I got to upgrade all my gear. You don't have to do all of that. And I think that we put that pressure on ourselves and we overcomplicate and muddy the waters. It's better to be really great at one thing, which I think should be podcasting if you want to be a podcaster, and get really, really good at that and then add things over time. But the problem is we compare our day one to some of these legendary creators year 20, year 10, right? We look at what they're doing now saying, well, I've got to do what they're doing at the level they're doing it now, or I'm not going to make it. And it's not true. If you met them, they'd say, no, I'd go back and do the one thing that I do well. And eventually, when I really get my systems honed in around that, right, I will add something along with it, but one at a time and never too much. And I think that's the secret, is just keep the main thing. If you say it's your podcast, then just podcast. Don't do all the other things until you know, I've got this. It's staying consistent. I'm never going to stop. What's the next most logical thing I can add to this to elevate this even further?
Oh, I'm like, mic drop right there. Seriously, there is like, oh my goodness, there's so much there. And I had a conversation because I did just that. Like, I was like, John Lee Dumas, like, I must be like him. And I actually had him on the show, and I asked him if you could start over. He's like, I would stay in my lane, and it definitely wouldn't be a podcast about entrepreneurship. And I was like, this is so interesting. I've worked so hard to try to do this, but now coming down the line, that he wanted to go back to simplify, like that simple thing. So I wanted to say that, like, this happens.
It's so true. And I think that so many of us, it is a bit of a trap. And I get, as creators, we're passionate. We want to try the new things. But at the end of the day, if you can just do your one thing in your niche, the world is so connected through the internet now, in search in every capacity, through search engines, through podcast players, through voice search, right? Through AI. Like, it's getting so small that if you just hone in on your niche instead of worrying about the big numbers, you might still get big numbers by being the only instead of just one of the masses. And John Lee Dumas is a great example. And I've heard him say that from stage as well, Jen. He said, I wouldn't do this again. It's too general. Like entrepreneurship, there's tens, hundreds of millions of people that want to hear that. No, he says, I would find the narrow, most specific thing I can. That there's probably 10,000 people in the whole world that would be interested. But guess what? You can connect with all 10,000 people. And for many of us, we're like, well, that's just, that audience isn't big enough for me. But guess what? Most of us are getting 20 or 30 people listening to our shows. So is it really not enough? You might actually find them if you really speak to them really well.
Yeah. And I just, again, this is one of the things that I love about your space is the simplified version. Like, stop looking out, start looking in. And like, what is it bringing to you? Is it even bringing you joy? Do you even love this? Like, have you made a community? Have you made a connection? There's so many things that I love about Pod Pros. I love about your show because it's like simplicity, 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 simplicity. Cure for Podfade, simplicity, and Alex.
Yeah, at the end of the day, my whole mission with this, if I could just share that, like the reason I preach this stuff isn't because it sells or because it is fun, don't get me wrong, but the reason I talk about this is because I'm very passionate about helping independent voices get heard and elevated through podcasting. Like on either side of the mic, I am passionate about that. If at the end of the day I can share what I want to see happen, I want more independent creators getting to share their message because I believe they're the only people that are ever going to reach certain segments of people in the world that need to hear it. And so for me, I'm going to share what I notice works to help people actually reach them on a long-term, consistent basis. And that's why I do all this, Jen. That's the reason I'm here today.
Yeah. And you can feel it in your content. You can feel it in how you share. I mean, the way that you connected, like, again, it was a water bottle that I put my logo on. And I was like, I'm just going to see what the buzz is around this cure for Podfade, because people that are really into it see the whole of where there's a cure. Like, hey, what is your cure? Because I've got one too.
Yeah. And that's immediately like I said, I saw that and honed in. I was like, who are you? And what do you do? I need to know you.
And then I was like, oh, I'm already in your space. Like, you're
I know,
already in
right?
my courses. This is so cool. And again, we can keep going back to this community and this simplified, like, I want to know for, like, in your communities, what is the one thing that you see everyone overcomplicating on, like, the either the editing side or on the sharing side? Or where are we putting too much into our, like where do you think? Because there's this balance. I know there's a balance, and you have a big, like, I call it a big community because I got a little bitty community, but you have a bigger community. So you've talked to these podcasters, the successful ones. You've talked to the podcasters that are like, peace out. I want to know, like, where do you think people should be focusing a lot more effort?
Yeah, it's around connectivity is where we should be focused more, which is, again, at the end of the day, it's about talking to a listener. I mean, if you can get on calls with them, nothing is more powerful in podcasting than having a one-on-one video call back and forth, right? Or just phone call or whatever it is, like connecting with them one-on-one. Nothing beats that. And I think that us creators need to spend more time doing that because you'll really learn if you're doing the right thing if you do that. Like you'll find out if you're heading in the right direction, if you're driving things forward in the way you should. But instead, we tend to get trapped by a little bit of perfectionism. And I'll be the first to admit, when I launched my podcast initially, that's me preaching to the choir here, right? Like straight up, like that was me. Every graphic had to look perfect. I couldn't have one issue in the audio. It had to be perfect, right? Nothing wrong. And I was spending hours upon hours upon hours doing all that work or having someone else even do some of that work. And the truth is, perfect isn't human. There's a simple way to say it. Perfect is not human because humans are not perfect, right? And we should all be proud of that fact. And that's perfectly fine. But the thing is, when we try to make it perfect, we're no longer making it for humans because humans aren't perfect. So when you have a perfect podcast with not even the slightest, oh, excuse me. Yeah, right. Yeah, sorry. Your name's Jen, not so-and-so, right? Like when you cut that stuff out, it makes it feel like, wow, this guy is perfect. I don't resonate with that. But when you keep those little things in, it actually does better for the show. And I'm not telling you purposely make mistakes or leave them in there. Like have some pride and want some excellence in what you do. But it's okay for it to sound human. And with the graphics, one day I forgot to do a graphic for an episode release, Jen. I'm just going to be straight up real with you. I'm like, the episode's out. What the heck do I do? I took a selfie with the screen behind me of me listening to the podcast episode. And that did like I don't even know, 20 or 30x better than any graphic ever posted, no matter how perfect it was. And I was like, wait a minute. I'm spending all this freaking time and money working on doing this. And all I did was post a dumb selfie that was out of focus. And everyone like flocked to my podcast by doing that. I made a commitment at that moment saying, you know what? I'm not going to do any fancy graphics anymore. I'm just going to post how it is, right? Like it's going to be raw. I might do a little bit here and there, but in general, it's just going to be raw. And my engagement is through the roof. And I'm spending not even a fraction of the time, almost no time. And when it comes to editing, I have someone who does it. I'm like, hey man, leave some, just get it done quick. You know, like if one of us sneezes, take that out. We don't need to hear that, right? Like, or if there's an ambulance that goes by and we pause for 30 seconds, pull that out, right? Like definitely get rid of that stuff. But in general, if I stumble over my words, it's fine. Just keep it. And the feedback I get since doing that is like, wow, man, you're really working hard to get good at this podcasting thing, which people's way of saying you're not quite there, but you're getting there. And I resonate with that. And so for me, again, we're focusing on the wrong stuff. We're focusing on perfection and trying to make everything great and highly polished. When in reality, people want to feel like it's being produced by humans for humans. And the best way to practice that is to talk to your listeners.
Oh, I'm like, okay, I feel a little called out and I appreciate it.
I wasn't trying to call you out. We all do it. All right.
I mean, but I do tricks, you know, because I produce a lot. I do a lot of, I have a lot of shows. It's just a nightmare sometimes, but those tend to go.
Oh yeah. and that's not a problem. I'm not saying that that's an issue. I'm just saying like when it gets to the point where you won't accept anything other than absolutely perfect, that's where the issue comes into play. And if you say a lot, it might be best for you to remove it as you work to remove it naturally as well. And that's okay. And I'm not trying to dog you too hard here, Jen. You do incredible work, by the way. So I'm definitely not wanting to make it sound like anything less than that.
Well, and it's something I've perfected because I was the person that, especially before some of these AI softwares, that I was sitting there in, you know, Adobe pulling out each one. And I'm like, well, sometimes it is important because it's our moment of pause and thinking. And it's also giving the listener time to catch up. And again, human, we're not robots. There can be pauses. I can take a breath. It's okay. Leave it in.
The best example I have of that is one time I had Jasmine Starr on my podcast, and she had just had a baby, and she's a really big guest. And she goes, Alex, I like you. And listen, my kid is here, and she's probably going to cry, but this is where I'm at in life, and I hope that's okay. And I was like, sure. Sure enough, the kid cried a few times during the episode. There was no way to edit it out. And I was like, oh, well, I have to just get over my perfectionism and we're just going to post it. And I'll tell you what, I never had so many comments of people loving that. Because again, they're like, oh, that's my life too. My life is just like that. And Jasmine Starr is human like me. So again, like going back to it, we shouldn't sweat that. We shouldn't sweat the small stuff. It's okay. If there's a human element that happens in it, I love it. We're going to keep it, right? Obviously, again, have some pride in what you do and don't be like, never editing again. Like, please make it a good experience for listeners, right? But I'm just saying, don't take it over the top.
I'm like, and can we just talk about your shirt? Like, lead with value.
Right. Yeah. I'm wearing a shirt right now and the words on it say lead with value. And that is firmly what I live by and believe in.
And it's what you're bringing. And it's what I truly see in the market because there's so much out there. Like, I have really done my research on people that are helping the industry. And especially now that I'm getting pickier and pickier and pickier about like, no, you're part of the reason that I need the cure versus
right.
You're part of the solution. And I don't want to call anyone out and I will never call anyone out, but there's so much in the industry that, like you said, you had a completely different talk at Podfest Global. That's what we need to be the cure so that, well, maybe we don't want everyone on our platform because I kind of do like being elite. But at the same time, I think more stories can make a bigger impact.
Right. Yeah.
If they move over to a beautiful platform like podcasting.
There you go. I love it. Yeah.
So I want to know, like, what was the biggest difference about that? Because I've brought it up twice now. My listeners are probably like, well, can I get the replay or something? But what was the biggest difference about your talk specifically than everyone else at that event?
It's some of the stuff we already talked about, but one thing we haven't mentioned is the shiny objects. A few minutes ago, you mentioned AI, right? And I call it a shiny object, not because it's not valuable, not because we shouldn't use it or anything like that, but I think it's important that we don't always feel the need to be the early adopter. And again, as creators, we kind of maybe struggle with that a little bit because it's like, oh, my friends are doing it, I want to do it too, right? So there's a quote by a friend of mine. His name's Jay Cron. And Jay Cron, just for some like backstory here, he's the guy who took Kajabi, like the course creating platform and all that, from $5 million to $2 billion. He was the guy at the helm to make that happen. And he said something that I thought was profound in a conversation I was having with him. He said, Alex, what's true isn't new, and what's new may or may not be true. So again, what's true isn't new, and what's new may or may not be true. And all that he was saying by bringing that up was that these AI tools, using YouTube for podcasting, getting these editors that do stuff automatically, all these things, like, they might not be true for your, like, as a requirement for growth for you. They may not be the solution you need, because one thing that we know is what's true isn't new. It has to be proven. And so I think for many of us, again, I'm not saying don't use like new tools and stuff like that. No, please, by all means, use things if you know it's going to add value. But I think that we all have to have a little bit more self-discipline to say, you know what? I'm going to let someone else prove this first. Let's let someone else build out like the flow for using this, so I'm not going into it being a pioneer again. I'm going to stay focused on my craft. And for most of the things, like, there's a lot of tools in podcasting that I don't use, not because I'm not interested, but because when I look at my list of things I need to work on to make more streamlined, more organized, they're not on that list right now. So that's a nice to do later on, right? As soon as someone can figure out how to add someday to the calendar, right? If there can be an 8th day of the week, I would do that. But right now, with the 7 days I have, I say, you know what? If there's a solution for X, Y, or Z, because that's what I'm currently looking for, I will be an early adopter there. But if it's not on that list, I will wait until it's been proven by other people. And I feel like I'm ranting here on that point a little bit, but my what I'm trying to articulate to everybody, and I want everyone to get, is don't always be the first person jumping on the bandwagon of something new. Wait until it's proven before you do that. And I find that will help us all just be a little calmer, because that new stuff, pioneering all the time, that's tough work, right? Like being the trailblazer. Take a step back, do what you know is working, and wait till someone else proves it for you. Then you can implement when you know it's solving a pain point that you have.
Wait, so we don't have to be first adopters, we don't have to trailblaze, and we don't have to be the hustler to be successful? Come on.
Yeah, it's maybe, I don't know, counterintuitive for some people. Maybe people are like, this is unconventional, to say the best, right? But anyway, that is what I believe, and it's worked very well for me.
And for your community, and for me, because again, this is one of the reasons why this conversation is important, is that I didn't have mentors in the beginning. I woke up, I'm like, I'm gonna be a podcaster. And I started my other podcast that day, and I did it all wrong for the first 2.5 years. I burnt myself out, but I didn't give up, because at that point I started finding tools to support me. I'm like, oh, look, this thing's been around for a long time. I could get on a podcast dating app. Cool. Like, I don't have to go hunt for these people. They've already kind of been vetted for me. Great. Podmatch, best friend, and I'm excited to see like what comes and the community. And I love to see that you're breaking things, like you're breaking the norms that are putting people in that I've made it to episode 5, 7. Now I'm going to leave, because we do want to support those 50% that actually do have something to share.
Yes. Yeah, through and through. Those are the people that, like, again, that they have a passion, they have a purpose. Like, we want to be here for them. I think that the cure for Podfade, right? Like, it's all going to happen through us finding those right people before they quit, right? That's the goal. Like, can we find them before they quit to help them out? Not so we can pull a bunch of money from them, right? Not so we can do all that. Like, yeah, I believe we're rewarded for the good value that we add to people, but I think it's just so important that we find ways to find those people so that they can continue to find their people who will listen and they'll be able to serve. Because in the day, like, I am a firm believer that podcasting is going to make the world a better place. And we've already seen that being the case, but I think it's just going to continue to expand and grow. And it's the way people are leaving real legacies in my mind.
Oh, and that's what it is. It's like, that's what I'm all about. I'm like, I hear everybody say like, be a ripple, be a ripple. I'm always like, nope, bust out your tsunami, because you are not a ripple. Like, right? Podcasting, you get to be a tsunami. Like, no more ripple makers here.
I love that. That's great.
We're tsunami generators. So if you had to add an ingredient or two to the cure for Podfade, what would those ingredients be?
Yeah, I'll share one, because I've talked so much, Jen. So I'm gonna share just one thing. I think it's a need for self-care, because what we talked about, and you even brought up a couple times, like, you persevered through podcasting. That takes self-discipline, and that really is what it comes down to. Like, if you're self-disciplined, you're going to keep through it, even if you don't do anything we talked about, right? You're going to find a way. But inside that self-discipline that we all need, we lose the sense of self-care that we need. And for me, that's where that's like what connects all this that we're talking about today is how well aligned can you make your self-care and your podcast? So for me, I stopped doing graphics. I started doing selfies while I was working because it brought me into the mix. It wasn't just Alex's podcast. It was now just part of Alex. This is how we do it. But also, like, you need to also have time away from podcasting, believe it or not. I take a full 24 hours off every week where I don't even open my computer. I'm not doing anything podcasting related. I know Jen's like, oh, what? How do you do that? But it's so important because I find that I show up better for the people I'm called to serve in the 6 days than I do in the 7. I don't know why, I don't know how, but that's just the way it seems to work. And so I encourage people, like, if you're doing this podcasting thing, make margin for self-care. Because if you do that, you're going to show up even better. Again, for the people you serve, the way that you want to, it gives you that refresh. Start building that in, start aligning your life and podcast even more if you can. And I think that's the ingredient that I would add to the cure.
Oh, and that's one ingredient that we haven't really had shared yet, is it's self-care. And it does, like, success starts within. Always will say that through and through. And I am going to, like, be the first to raise my hand and say, like, hey, that's where I struggle right now, is that self-care. Like, hustle, 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 show up every day. But that one day of recharge, I can only imagine what the coming back would feel like.
Yeah. Jen, I just got my dictionary out and I see next to hustle and self-discipline, it's got your picture right here. No one believes that because no one has a physical dictionary anymore, but you know what I mean. So
I'm just like, yeah. So where can people, I mean, you're everywhere. I've mentioned you over and over again because, like, I truly believe in these programs. Like, people know that, like, when I call things out, especially because I've been calling out your show your show, I've called out your services and they really did change my life because they connected me to people and I got to build that community during the dark time of my life. And I'm forever grateful. But can you share in your own words, like, where can we find you?
yeah, thank you again for sharing the platform and allowing me to be part of the cure that I think you're really leading the way in right now, Jen. So thank you again. Everything I do can be found at podpros.com/win. That page specifically, podpros.com/win, will give you 5 quick wins that you can read in less than 5 minutes. It's whether you're a podcast guest, host, aspiring guest, aspiring host, any of those categories will work. I don't want your email address or anything like that. It's just going to give you 5 quick things you can read in less than 5 minutes that I hope will be very helpful for you. So again, that's podpros.com/win. But hang out with Jen. You're taking people places, and I'm so thankful for being connected with you and what you're doing and for always mentioning me. You've helped me a lot. So I really appreciate you so much.
It's been such a pleasure. And it was just so cool to meet somebody that, again, like I said, without even the introduction, just knowing what it's done for me, like, I've been sharing. And I'm not just saying this. I'm not just trying to, like, like, oh, he's my guest. Like, I hope that everybody truly knows that I say these things with, like, utmost, this has supported me. Like, you have been part of the journey. You've been part of the cure way before I met you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it so much. And thank you again for sharing the platform with me. It means so much.